12 years of the Modi government, and one aspect of what we've seen is how much more of India's civilization is there in our daily life. And today I have the privilege of moderating two men who I've had the privilege of moderating before. They're friends of mine as well, who've probably done more than most to make Indians look backwards in order to think forwards. And this is very important. One is an economist who you all recognize, who somehow spends as much time talking about ancient ports, sailing in boats across the seas, lost rivers, forgotten empires, as he does about GDP and public policy. The other is a banker turned author, one of India's best, who convinced millions of Indians that Shiva wasn't just a god in a temple, but a living civilizational idea. Now, between them, they've helped popularize the notion, apart from their main jobs, that India's future may actually be easier to understand if we understand India's past, and why it's so critical never to forget what came before us. So it's my pleasure to welcome Sanjeev Sanyal and Amish Tripathi on stage here at the Ignite Future India Summit. I'm going to start off, first of all, because these are two very busy men who have incredibly interesting side projects, which I'm going to get into in just a bit. But my first question, and Sanjeev, I'll kick it off with you. What, in your view, is the most visible sign in the last 12 years of India's civilizational identity being present in our public life, in what we see around us?
So the important thing is that I think that has changed in the last 12 years under the Honorable Prime Minister Modi's leadership is the fact that we have begun to view our history in a fundamentally different way to inform our present. So somehow in the past, we thought of our history as something to be fearful of. It was basically a series of conquests and, okay, we survived, but then the world was something to fear. And that, by the way, filtered through to the way our foreign policy was, the way we, for example, dealt with the world in terms of import substitution and so on. So what happens as a result of this is that it is a very defensive view of the world. The switch, on the other hand, to this other view of history is that, no, we were a much more adventurous, expansionist people. We explored the world. We went to far-off places. We explored. We were adventurous. We took risks. This is a world where our ancient temples were financing these great voyages. They were financing industrial expansion. And so this is a very different worldview. So this is a worldview of risk-taking. And that then filters through, there's a direct link between that and, for example, helping startups. The idea of creative destruction, which is there in the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Directly through to thinking of make in India, but not in the old import substitution way, but in terms of taking on the world. So it's a fundamentally different sort of switch in our head that Prime Minister Modi has been able to turn on.
Sanjeev knows a thing or two about risk-taking because he built an entire ancient boat from scratch and then actually sailed it across the Arabian Sea to Oman. So he practices what he preaches. Amish, same question to you. 12 years, this is a world you live in. It's already something that is familiar to you. You're seeing a lot more of it now, in daily life, in public policy, in normal public conversations as well. What would you say is the most important reflection of that civilizational kind of awareness and awakening in our public life that has changed in the last decade?
I think in some ways it's become so obvious that you don't even need to speak about it. I wrote my first book in 2010.
Yeah.
And the first time I was invited to a Lit Fest, I think that was 2011, 2012. I'd gone up on stage and I'd said, I'm a very proud Hindu. And yes, the people on stage with me and the audience, just almost kind of froze up. And this was in a land that has been Hindu for thousands of years. That doesn't mean that we are against any other religion or any other way of life. Of course not. We've always been welcoming. But the fact that that was the state of at least the elite conversations in India for that long is something that tells us how far we had gone from our roots. I agree with Sanjeev when he says that we just survived. we weren't thriving. And that was because actually we weren't connected to our roots. A tree, if the roots start drying, it may look like the tree is still alive, but over time, the nutrition dies out. What's happening now is that the roots are getting stronger. And over time, that just becomes more and more and more obvious. It informs us in most of the conversations that we're having. The fact that we're talking about what kind of urban governance we should have, how the monsoon system should be managed, how our trading should be, the fact that we are much more Indian Ocean focused than quote unquote Northwest invader focused. We're just getting more and more rooted, and that is a very good thing. I'm not saying we need to swing to the other extreme and not allow noble thoughts to come from all parts of the world. Our ancestors never had that attitude. Yeah? Ano Bhadra, Kruto, Yattu, Vishwata. Let all noble thoughts come from all corners of the world. But we must be rooted in our own traditions, in our own land first. That's most critical.
Sanjeev, you said something that struck me about looking back at the risk-taking impulses of our ancestors. And that's a very interesting thing that you've said. Are you suggesting that India as we know it now has over the centuries and decades perhaps kind of lost that appetite for risk, and that's what this civilizational awakening is about? Being outgoing, going out there.
Absolutely. In fact, this was deliberately inculcated into us. So we were told that from ancient times, Indians were scared of crossing the oceans. Absolutely not true. We were the greatest explorers of the ancient world. I mean, it's not for nothing that the largest Hindu temple in the world is in Cambodia, not in India. How did it get there? Somebody must have gone there. How did he get there? Only by sailing. So there is a huge amount of evidence of this expansionary kind of civilizational zest that we have once had. And instead we were sort of put into us that, yes, Indians did some spiritual thing, maybe they were doing meditation throughout those thousands of years, and basically, we had no agency. People would come, invade, provide us with, new recipes for biryani or built a few nice buildings, but basically we had no agency in this whole thing, and we were passively accepting all of this. And so systematically our history was changed in order to insert this idea. And we imbibed it to such an extent that we ourselves, even those, by the way, who may agree with me otherwise, have imbibed it to such an extent, they find it quite difficult when I tell people that, in fact, Indians were quite expansionist, culturally expansionist, even militarily expansionist. I mean, there's lots of evidence of Indian naval activity in other parts of the world. There were Indian mercenaries everywhere in the world, particularly in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So, this idea of this country and people who somehow have no agency and sitting around waiting for some foreigner to invade us and give us civilization. And this was done so systematically. That is what is interesting. It's not like we ended up here by chance. The British even told us basically that, look, even the little bit of civilization you're proud of, guess what? They are these white people from Central Asia who came and told you them this, and they are called the Aryans. And all we are doing by invading and taking over is giving you a software update. Why are you complaining? So this has been done very systematically to us. Now, of course, every colonizing power did this to whoever they colonized. Our problem was that for 70 odd years after independence, we ourselves perpetuated it. So much so that it's only very recently that it's been finally peeled out of our NCERT books, out of our national conversations and so on. And in fact, I continuously have to push back against these kinds of ideas that we were somehow naturally a pacifist and sort of defensive people.
How did it happen? How did we get to this point in your view in that case, Amish? From being this very risk-taking, like Sanjeev says, an expansionist civilization, not a pacifist, sort of defensive, sitting around and waiting for things to happen as he described it. In your view, because you've looked at how things have changed over the centuries, written about it in books as well. How do you think we got here?
I think this needs deeper analysis by scholars, but I have a theory. Look, there was this phase of history over the last 1500, 2000 years. The invaders who came here, the Turks, Turco-Mongols, Europeans, and the Turks were essentially from the steppelands of Asia, right? Which went from Eastern Europe all the way to Manchuria in Eastern China, whatever, 8,000, 10,000 miles. They went to every other corner of the world. Everywhere where they went, practically every ancient culture died out. Some of them fought for 100 years, some for 200 years, max maybe 400, 500. They were all dead, right? We're the only ones who are still here after them having ruled us, the foreign invaders. And it must be made clear, they were foreigners. What we call the Delhi Sultans and Mughals, they weren't Indian Muslims. They were foreigners, they were Turks. Indian Muslims were as oppressed as Indian Hindus. Ranveer Singh is a great actor, but trust me, Alauddin Khilji didn't look like Ranveer Singh. To us, he would have looked, he had
more like
Mongoloid
Deng
features.
Xiaoping.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a diplomat, so I won't take a name, but yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah.
The point is, we suffered this violence for what, 1300 years, right? Most other cultures are dead. We're still around. Now, what happens when a culture dies out? The computer just gets reformatted, right? The memory is reformatted. You just start from scratch. That if we go to, like for example, I'd gone to Greece. I'd seen a destroyed temple of Athena. I'm not Hellenic. It's the ancient pagan Greek culture. I felt sad out there. The local Greeks who came out there didn't feel sad. I'd gone to Parthenon, which was in Rome, which was actually an ancient pagan Roman temple. I felt a sense of connect, but the local Italians didn't, right? Because they've been reformatted. We haven't been reformatted. So the memories of the violence, oppression, invasions of 1300 years are still there, right? And if you go through our history, we almost had a reconquista 3 times actually. Once at the end of the initial Arab thing before the main Turkic invasion of the Ghoris came. Then by the end of the Delhi Sultanate, before the Mughals came, parts of India had been reconquered already, right? Not just Vijayanagar, various other parts. Then again the Mughals came and we lost once again. Then the Marathas had reconquered almost completely. Then the British came. So we had done a reconquista 3 times. We'd come close to becoming free and then we lost once again.
The formatting happens.
And we did not get formatted. The memory of that loss is with us. So then after 1947, when we became free once again, was it that we'd become the trauma was still there, right? It's possible. That's one theory. That maybe the trauma just made us risk averse. But now it's been 75 years of peace. Countries have tried to attack us. Countries have tried to divide us. Nothing like that has happened. In fact, we've divided those countries that attacked us.
Yeah.
We are strong once again. Let's revive our ancient, robust, strong, outgoing culture that we used to have.
Is there absolutely? Is there an era, Sanjeev, in your view, and you look at such a large sweep of India's history? Is there an era, a period, a character from history that you believe is unfairly neglected and deserves our attention? And I know this is a tough question for someone like you because there must be so many.
There are lots.
Yeah, but name a few of them and why we need to know more about them.
So of course everybody knows about the likes of Shivaji.
Yeah.
Heroic character, fights against oppression. But why not Samudragupta, for example? Samudragupta is an extraordinary character. He comes to the throne at a very difficult time when you have all these Sakas and Huns attacking from the west. And he, of course, he goes all the way down South India, make sure that the peninsular India is well in his control. And then he basically takes on these Sakas. And then for the following 4 generations, the Guptas really push back the Huns and the Sakas. Not a trivial thing to do. And so that is an extraordinary period in history. And yet we only hear about him in passing.
Hardly. Yeah.
And look at again, going back to the colonial way in which he is kind of boxed in. if you read even textbooks today, you'll hear he was the Napoleon of India. So who named him Napoleon of India? It turns out that the European historians of the 19th century named him Napoleon of India, and Indians took it as some sort of high praise. See, one of our kings has been called Napoleon. But in fact, the British were very, very clever. What they were doing is saying that, look, here is one of your greatest generals, and he was as good as Napoleon, but do remember, we defeated him.
Yeah.
That is the real messaging. So this continuous subliminal
And that just stuck.
And that just stuck. So even today, you'll read, he was the Napoleon of India, not realizing we are actually being mocked.
True.
Or Chanakya was the...
And it's in our textbooks even now,
Yeah,
like you
It's
rightly
even in
said.
our textbooks.
Yeah.
Or that Chanakya was the Machiavelli of India. Machiavelli managed a state. Chanakya managed 1/5 of humanity. Okay, actually it's just one city that Machiavelli managed. What the hell is the comparison? There's no comparison.
No, but this is very important. I want you to expand on this, Amish. The Chanakya Machiavelli comparison. Expand on that a little bit, because most people will go out and say the Machiavelli of politics, etc. to
Not at all, because
to politicians here.
Just the scale of Machiavelli, tiny, just a city, right? Whereas Acharya Chanakya managed all of India. The modern
He created
empire,
that empire, by the way.
He created that empire, and the modern empire was the greatest, the biggest empire in the Indian subcontinent ever, right? And unlike, I've read Machiavelli's works, The Prince, and of course I've read the Arthashastra as well. Unlike Machiavelli, who, well, you'd think he understands power, but really has no sense of ethics or morality. That's a sense that you get from reading his books. I haven't read any biography of his or something, reading from his books. But if you read Acharya Chanakya, he will do things which you can say is of doubtful integrity, but the ends are always positive. It's always about what is in the interest, the long-term interest of the people, of the state. It was never selfish about the king gaining more power just for the heck of gaining more power. There was always a purpose to it. And that is a very, very, very big difference. That power is not something you accumulate for selfishness. Power is a responsibility for the good of the people. And it's in terms of, people who are ignored. It's not just in terms of politics or military. There are so many who are ignored. Lalitaditya Muktapida, Lachit Borphukan, so many, Lachit Borphukan. But even in other areas, like in the sciences or the spaces of intellect, Bodhayana is ignored, Pythagoras will be remembered, Shushruta and Charaka are ignored, Hippocrates will be remembered. Same in business. We assume that the earliest multinationals, were European, British or Dutch. It'll shock you to know that the earliest multinationals were actually Indian. If there are any Kannadigas here, you should applaud for yourself. At least the earliest multinational I'm aware of is the 500, right?
Yeah.
From Aihole. 1400, 1500 years ago. We're not taught about this at all.
Manigramam from Tamil Nadu.
Exactly.
No, but we're all brought up to
In
think
all
that
these areas, we had achievers.
that the best case examples of anything you can think of are basically from outside India. They're not from within India. And you've just said that the first multinational was from here in India.
Yeah.
Multinational guilds.
Yeah.
Not only that, they were being financed by these temples, which were banks. And we have examples of these contracts between the temple and the merchant guilds, and the merchant guilds with the artisan guilds. So that you're going to export to Indonesia or some such place, that here is a loan, that loan is to be used to produce whatever, cloth or whatever, then be exported. And there are clear clauses, what happens if the ships sink and all of these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And these would all be recorded in copper plates. Like the nonsense we were taught, our ancestors were oral, they didn't write anything. Our ancestors wrote a hell of a lot. It's just we are the unworthy descendants who haven't read what they wrote.
This session is feeling like a civilizational fact check that transcends continents and transcends centuries. So I can imagine how long it's going to take to actually reset some of this erroneous software. If I could, extend the metaphor that you use. But Sanjeev,
Since this is more free flowing, may I just add one minor point?
Yeah.
Don't be so anti-West that you don't learn the good things about them.
I agree.
There are many good things from them. We should learn that too. Our ancestors believe that Goddess Saraswati can bless anyone. learn from whoever she has blessed.
Yeah. Sanjeev, the civilizational awakening awareness is very palpable for, many of us. In the media, we see it. You, of course, see it in your travels. I'm sure Amish sees it in the thousands of people he interacts with every day here in the country. Is there a case for civilizational, this heritage being in our public policy as a, as something that we need for our economy to grow?
Absolutely, because you have to remember that economics and politics is ultimately downstream of culture. If you disturb the overall culture, the economics you learn and the politics you do will be of that kind, because it's the overall architecture of your mind is set up actually by culture. So this is a very, very important thing to remember, because that's why, for example, the same Europeans were there during Roman times. Then for 1,000 years they had the Dark Ages. Yeah. Then they came back in the Renaissance. What happened? It's the same people. It is the cultural context that changed. The same thing is true of us. For a long, long time, we were the dominant economy in the world, the dominant cultural force in the world. Then we fell apart. And then, after becoming free also, we remained this rather fearful kind of country. It is very recently that we have begun to feel the confidence back. And by the way, we will also grapple with it in the dark to some extent as we begin to find a new equilibrium and a proper confidence. So at some point it may even go too far, become too arrogant as well. So we'll have to find that balance. But the point is, this is an important part of how we think about the world, is derived by cultural and civilizational frameworks. Now, for example, as I just told you, this whole idea of risk-taking. This is until you have a culture that celebrates failure, going out there and doing various things, you won't get great sportsmen. Being a sportsman is an extremely risky profession to choose. You won't get this idea. Very recently you go to an IIT and ask people in the audience, how many of you want to do a startup? Now a lot of them will raise their hands. The cool kids in university campuses today are people who want to do startups. But there is still the old framework, because only good thing to do is to either become a trade union leader or UPSC exams. So, that's a fundamental shift in the way you think about the world, a UPSC exam framework of thinking of the world. And let's go and do a startup or become a writer or do something, break out in some fashion. So that is a civilizational shift. And that is also true again of the way we think about, for example, the huge debate that we're now having in the business world about startups. Who should be the titans of industry? We question people if they don't have large R&D budgets. Earlier on, we used to question them if they didn't have large CSR budgets. It's a switch.
Yeah.
So that is a very different way of thinking about the world, and it shows through into policy. It shows through into the way we respond to the same set of circumstances. And I'll give you the flip side of it, on the other side. Europe, after now 500 odd years of the Renaissance, and the West in general, after 500 years of Renaissance, during that Renaissance, they did amazing things, explored the world. You have to grant it to them. They explored the world. They did all these scientific changes and so on. Now, 100 years ago, they were doing, they were exploring let's say the biology scientists of the West were creating a taxonomy for different kinds of species and so on. Today, biology students are trying to do a taxonomy of the different kinds of genders you have. Completely non-serious. And you can see how the tipping point on the other side after 500 years of Renaissance is happening, as their own minds are closing and going into the form but not the essence of expansion of knowledge and risk-taking.
Important point. Again, I want to just point out that many of the characters that Sanjeev and Amish have just mentioned in the course of this discussion are people we think we know very well, or eras we know very well, and the both of you have already given us a huge amount to think about. Amish, for instance, and Amish, we've spent many sessions on stage together, and each time I've learned something new about the characters you've written about. Shiva is one of your characters that you wrote about.
No, he's the god I worship.
The god, Mahadev that you wrote about, this country knows. This country always thought they knew everything about. And then people read your books and there were these fascinating new layers to it. So I want to ask you that, even Samudragupta, some would argue, most people may not know very much about. But Shiva, for instance, is something that is central to life in India. And yet it seems like people don't know enough about even these central characters. So there's a case there as well, that even those we know so much about from our civilization, from our heritage, needs a revisit.
I think the way our ancestors, particularly if you read the texts, the plays that our ancestors left behind, it's almost like they never got bored of listening and learning from the messages of our gods and goddesses. And perhaps one thing that we can learn from our ancestors, it's not just about bhakti and worship. That is important, don't get me wrong. And I'm a very, very, very devout Shiva worshipper. And I've said that proudly even when it wasn't fashionable to say so. But you shouldn't stop only there. You need to learn from the messages of our gods and goddesses as well. What if you're reading the Mahabharata and only seeing the story and enjoying the beauty of the story, and there's a lot of beauty of the story. If that's all that you're seeing, then you're stuck at the surface level. You need to go deeper. What are the messages? What are the philosophies? What can I apply in my life today? Right? When you look at Lord Shiva and you read more of his stories, you worship him, of course, but read more of his stories, hear more of his stories. For example, the story of Ardhanarishwar, right? Where Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati merged. Right side is Lord Shiva, left side is Goddess Parvati. And long story short, net, there was a priest called Rishi Bhringi who was a very, very devout Lord Shiva worshipper, as I am, and he said, I'll worship only you, no one else, not even your wife. And to teach him a lesson, Lord Shiva merged with Goddess Parvati, that there's no difference between the masculine and the feminine. Isn't that a beautiful lesson to learn? Now, this is how we must go a lot deeper. Don't just worship. Of course you should, but go deeper. Learn a lot more. Apply it in your life as well. You lead a much, much richer life.
Is there a figure from our heritage that you have on your sort of list to write about and get into?
So many, man. I have so many projects running simultaneously. There's a Sanskrit song that we just released, Tandav Stotram, that had been written by Ravan in honor of Lord Shiva. There's a video game coming out by early 28, proper AAA video game, the first AAA video game on an Indian subject. There's a movie that I was associated with, Krishna Avtaram, that just released. 2 books that I've just finished, which will also come out soon. Listen, I mean, we have at least an 8,000-year history, if not more. We have so much knowledge, so much heritage. Sanjeev and I can spend multiple lifetimes and we'll not cover everything that there is to uncover and learn and appreciate in our great culture.
The both of you should think of collaborating on either fiction or non-fiction at some point of time. You really must, the both of you. Done. Okay, great. Fantastic.
We also happen to be dear
friends. Sanjeev Sanyal and Amish are going to be collaborating on a project very soon. And I can't wait to see that. And it's happened on the NDTV stage, so you'll have to credit us. Sanjeev, you work closely with Prime Minister Modi. And, if one thing can be said about him, peak detailing. He radiates civilizational awareness, tributes to our ancestors, and just a kind of acknowledgement of what came before us. What is it like working with him? Does he exude that? Does that infuse his decision making, the way he conducts being a prime minister? As part of his team, how does it work? What's it like?
So.
I'm asking because we see it from outside. Yeah. What's it like?
So I've worked with him now for, first in finance ministry and now directly part of his team over 9.5 years. And these 9 years have seen many difficult phases. Let's say, for example, the COVID phase. So I was part of the core team managing the economy through COVID. These are also we are having, because of oil price spike, difficult times. Now, all of this requires 2 things. One is you have to take tough decisions. Secondly, very often everybody around you is losing their head, whether it's in the financial markets or all the advice you get from NRI economists in American universities. You'll be getting lots of advice. keeping your calm and still doing the right thing is not easy to do. Now, somebody like me may give good technocratic advice, but in the end, you have to understand and there are many steps, and some of them will almost certainly go wrong, but the fact of the matter is, he is the one who is ultimately going to take the responsibility for it.
Yeah.
So if and when things go wrong, so it turned out that the the COVID management, and later on people said well done and all that. But while we are doing those things, there's lots of self-doubt. And the only reason you're able to do this is because you have somebody like the Honorable Prime Minister backing you to do this. And this is also true of all I've literally done more than 100 process reforms. Each one of them, when I do it, I'm not 100% sure it's going to work out. And sometimes you need to reiterate a few times before it gets going. Now, unless you have absolute confidence that somebody is going to back you, because do remember, it requires sometimes pushing back against bureaucracy, pushing back against interest groups, sometimes pushing back against judiciary, and so on and so forth. It does require you to have to stick your neck out. You would not do it unless you were not certain that the top political leadership is backing you to take those risks. So you need somebody like him to be there. So, many people have these fantasies that, if only the country was run by technocrats, it'd be so wonderful. No, the technocrats cannot do anything unless there is somebody who will back you up.
When the Prime Minister goes abroad, Amish, and we're almost out of time, but I'll squeeze this in. One defining feature of the last 10, 12 years has been that confidence aa gaya, a word that Sanjeev also used. The general sense is people feel nice seeing the Prime Minister out there on the front foot, diaspora, and wearing your Indianness on your sleeve. You interact with a lot of young people. Many of your readers are young people as well. Is that a real confidence that you feel about, reveling in Indianness and your heritage and all these ancestral things that we're talking about, that the Prime Minister insists on talking about in all his public interactions? Is that something that has pervaded the public, in your view?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot more confidence than there was in my generation. Sanjeev and I are the same generation. I'm 51, he's just a few years older. And certainly more so than our parents' generation. So our generation, for example, would see racism even when there was no racism, or would be unnecessarily servile at times, against, say, Westerners. The younger generation, I find a lot more confident. Maybe that's why Prime Minister Modi is that popular with them as well, because he speaks with confidence, he speaks with rootedness. Confidence is at the heart of success. Excess confidence is ugly. That should not be there. Pride and arrogance should not be there, but confidence is important. If you don't have confidence, you don't take the first step. And that, I think, credit to the messaging that the Prime Minister has given over the last many years. Credit to the people of India that we have become more and more successful economically, because at the heart of everything is artha. As Chanakya had said, Sukhasya moolam dharma, dharmasya moolam artha. If there is no artha, if you are poor, then everything else starts collapsing. So many things are coming together. But we must realize that this next 10 years is going to be really difficult. And no one is going to make it easy for us. When America was rising as a superpower, the British Empire was trying everything to trip them up, as were many other European powers. When the UK was rising, there was this phase. I remember Sanjeev and I had spoken about, between 1750s and 1770s, when they were fighting battles all over the world. And that's the time they earned the right to become a superpower. It's the same thing all of us Indians have to remember as well. When we say, oh, they're being unfair to us, this power is hurting us, that power is hurting us, why should they make it easy for us? It's never made easy for anyone. Yeah. You want to be at the big boys' table, you have to fight your way in. No one just pulls the chair up for you and, aao baitho bhai. No one does that. So, we need to be focused over the next 10, 15 years. This confidence is good, but we must be focused as well. We must realize that most other countries in the world will try to trip us up
Yeah.
and not get emotional about it. It's what we would do as well 100 years later to stop another superpower. It's the way the world works, right? And we have to earn our right to get to the big boys table, which makes it even more important. Last point is that we should not be disunited. That is the biggest mistake we have made very often in our past. We can all have our arguments internally, never pick the side of a foreigner against a fellow Indian. Never do that. Kaurav 100, Pandav 5, Tija aaye to 105. That's the attitude we must have.
And I'm going to end with that beautiful point that you just made. But I wanted to squeeze in just one final question to you, Sanjeev, because this is an important one. Young people are asking it. The world, and especially India, feels like we are at a jump-off point now. There's AI, there's the Prime Minister's semiconductor mission, all these exciting things that are going to change our lives completely. You are in the war room that is driving India's growth as well. How important, in your view, finally, is remembering the past, remembering heritage, as we get into these big unknowns that are going to define our future?
See, progress is a messy thing. As we climb higher and higher, it becomes more scary as well, because you can see how far down you can fall. And as you're climbing up, you're fighting, of course, there are other countries that don't want you to rise. Yeah. But even the things you're doing, some of it will go wrong. Whether it's businesses will go wrong, technologies will change, there'll be political shocks, you'll have oil prices spiking, some other things spiking. So all kinds of shocks will happen along the way. So it's not easy. So this has to be a multi-generational effort. Our generation is doing something, this will have to be done by the next and so on. Now, to have a sense of purpose over multiple generations, you need to have a sense of civilizational continuity. Otherwise, why am I doing this? For great grandkids who I will never meet. So, the importance of this is very important. And again, I'll go back. The West used to have it, but it has lost it. And there will be a price they will pay for losing this sense of civilizational continuity. They too had a great civilization. Western civilization with its roots going back to Greece and Rome and so on is incredible. And they rediscovered it in the Renaissance. That's how they came back. They too went through a rediscovery phase. And you get a sense that we may be coming to the end of that cycle. And meanwhile, the rise of China too has a very strong civilizational sense. Be under no illusion that China is not a civilizational nation, very similar to us in many ways. Yeah. And so their rise too is that sense of destiny that comes from a sense of having a long history.
You've given us a great deal to think about, and I, for one, cannot wait for that collaboration between the both of you, Amish Tripathi and Sanjeev Sanyal. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for being here at NDTV.